Welcome. So we're glad you're here today. This is the fourth installment of our weekly conservation conversation series we've been doing. This week it's all about restoring the Gold Coast. George Gann is going to walk us through a presentation. I actually will a little bit in there as well. And at the end, we'll open it up for questions. So in the meantime, we're going to keep mics and videos off because we're recording this to post later for if people can't join us right now. So if you have questions that come up throughout the video, feel free to use this public chat feature in here on Zoom, and we'll make sure all of those get answered at the end. So if you think of something during the presentation, feel free to put that in at any time on the chat. We'll make sure all of those questions get answered along with anything else that might come up at the end. So in case you don't know who we are, we're the Institute for Regional Conservation. We're a nonprofit organization based out of Delray Beach, Florida. We just celebrated our 35th year last year in 2019. And George Gann is our Chief Conservation Strategist. He'll be going through most of the presentation. And I'm Kara Abbott, the Education and Outreach Coordinator for IRC. So we're so glad to have you with us today. And without further ado, we can go ahead and hand it over to George.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kara. And thanks everyone for joining us. I see a number of collaborators and research associates and friends on the call. So thanks for being here. All right, so we're gonna get going, and this is all about restoring the Gold Coast, biodiversity, healthy dunes, and community engagement in Southern Palm Beach County. Now, if I can get my screen to move, that would be helpful. There we go. All right. So I want to start off with some acknowledgements. For anybody who knows IRC and our work, you'll know that a lot of people have contributed to the things that we produce. And so this is not about Kara or me. It's about all of the people who have put input into the process, and all of our many conservation partners who we work with. You're going to see a lot of excellent photography on the website and in part of this presentation. I just want to give a shout out to some of those folks who've contributed to what we do, to our sponsors for restoring the Gold Coast, and also to Native to Your Neighborhood, which we're linking to this program. And then a special thanks to Rob Barron for a lot of assistance and collaboration over the last couple of years, and to Silent Native Nursery down in Homestead for donations of native plants for the project. And before we dive into the detail, I want to just say that over the last couple of years, we've been really building a coalition of support for restoring the Gold Coast. As we will see a little bit later, we were the recipient of a $100,000 grant from Impact 100 Palm Beach County. Also received $10,000 from New York Life, and then a number of other organizations and individual sponsors, and a growing list of collaborators in the project. And hopefully we will continue to grow this list. So the outline is that we're going to talk a little bit about IRC and our mission, the conservation context in South Florida, and restoring the Gold Coast, and its relevance, progress to date, and our plans for the rest of this year and beyond. And then hopefully that will take about 35 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for a conversation in the last 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the hour. So we are the Institute for Regional Conservation, and our aim is to protect, restore, and manage all biodiversity on a regional basis to prevent local extinctions of native plants, animals, and ecosystems. So some organizations might focus on specific groups of plants or animals, and especially charismatic species or species that are narrow global endemics. And the idea of our program is, what would we have to do to try and conserve everything that we've inherited in whatever region that we're working in. And so this particular program is based in South Florida. And so we're interested in, what kind of contribution can we make to conserve the flora, the fauna, and the ecosystems that were historically found in South Florida. As Kara mentioned, this is our 36th year, and we have a staff of 13 research and conservation associates, and 7 board members. We do a lot of different kinds of things to support our program, including floristic and faunistic inventories and rare species research and so on. We'll talk about some of these a little bit later on, so I'm not going to just read through this list. One of the things that we really try to do is produce resources that people can use that are free online, or books or pamphlets and that kind of thing. And these are, they're more than educational resources. They're based on a lot of data that we've collected, or that people have contributed to the programs over the years. And they're intended for all kinds of different audiences. So they could be the general public, gardeners, but also land managers and scientists and researchers and so forth. And we have resources like Natives to Your Neighborhood for people doing native plant landscaping and gardening, Floristic Inventory of South Florida. We have websites and resources for Puerto Rico, a new one in development for the Bahamas, and collaborated on guides like this gardening guide for living on the Barrier Island with the Ocean Ridge Garden Club. We do a lot of restoration work, and we have a professional crew, but we also like to run a restoration project so that we include the public. My belief, and the belief of others in the organization, is that if we don't engage the public, then conservation will fail. And so this is especially true of restoration, that we want to get people engaged at the earliest stages of what it is that we're trying to do, and get them involved actually in the field with helping to plant, pull weeds, kill exotics, all sorts of things, even down to picking up trash, as Kara will say, right? All aspects of the operation. We also do international policy work. I do a lot of work with our collaborators, Society for Ecological Restoration, and I'm the lead author of the second edition of the International Principles and Standards for the Practice of Ecological Restoration. So we try to bring global guidance into the work that we do in South Florida and elsewhere. It really has a big effect on the way that we think about restoration and conservation. And so I just wanted to let you know about that. All right, a little bit about the South Florida conservation context. So we're in South Florida. We're in more or less that gray area at the southern tip of Florida. The way we define South Florida is it's the 10 southernmost counties, so Martin, Glaze, and Charlotte County South, basically anything from the northern rim of Lake Okeechobee down to the Florida Keys. And this region is part of the North American Coastal Plain Global Hotspot. So that means that there's a high proportion of endemic species, that is species found nowhere else in the world. This is not just plants, it includes animals. And that there's also a high degree of threat. And so it's very important in terms of global biodiversity, what occurs in our area. The thing that makes Florida, and South Florida in particular, interesting is this interface between plants in particular that are reaching their southern limits, temperate species reaching their southern limits in South Florida, like this loblolly bay that barely makes it into Martin and Palm Beach counties, and then tropical things like this orchid that barely make it into South Florida, sometimes a single occurrence in our region. On top of that, we have global endemics. We have things that are found nowhere else in the world. This is fall sisal. This is related to sisal hemp from the Yucatan, and it's an endemic to the coastline and within our project area. But you can see it's fairly widespread within South Florida. There's pretty much a lot of records, and it's on the east and the west coast, and also down in the Florida Keys. But it's actually slowly being wiped out along the coastline. One of the things that we will try to rectify with our project. And then we have narrower endemics like this beach cluster vine, which is federally endangered, found only in the southeast coast of Florida, from Key Biscayne north up into Martin County. On top of that, we have widespread species, some of which are more common in other parts of the world. Like this black bog rush, which is more common in Europe. It's native there. It's also native here, but it's a rather uncommon part of our flora. So it's actually this mix of species that makes things interesting. And so local biodiversity matters. Regardless of whether something is common or rare in other parts of the world, it's important to us to try and conserve and restore the full biodiversity of South Florida. And how can we do that with the millions of people that also live here? And that indeed is our challenge. So this is just one example of a slide that shows a number of different species that are critically imperiled or of federal interest in Everglades National Park that grows in hardwood hammocks. And so we can have similar slides of different kinds of species and different ecosystems. And plant biodiversity is the key to animal biodiversity. And so when we start talking about the Gold Coast, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but plants are needed for invertebrates. Those invertebrates then feed birds and other animals and so on up the food chain. If we look at the conservation system of South Florida, we'll see that we have a very robust conservation system. The global target for 2020 is 17% of terrestrial ecosystems, and we have over 50%. But the problem is the proportionality of the ecosystems that are protected. And so most of the protected areas in our conservation system are freshwater and marine wetlands. And the upland areas where people typically live and work and farm, those areas are not as well protected. And so biodiversity that is only found in these upland areas is disproportionately affected by the development in our area. And so you can see this is a Florida Natural Areas Inventory map of the Delray Beach area and Southern Boynton. And if you look at this map, unlike the other one, you can see when you really zoom in here that there's really not a whole lot going on other than people in the eastern part of the county. And this is true of scrub and mesic flatwoods and other ecosystems. But today we're particularly concerned with what's going on the barrier islands. And you can see that there are very few conservation areas that remain on the barrier islands as well. All right, so we're going to get into the Restoring the Gold Coast context and a little bit of background about that. So our general premise is that a healthy dune is a diverse dune. And so there's all sorts of sciences coming out about diversity and resilience and related matters. And so it's not just about diversity for diversity's sake, although that would be just fine for us, but it's also important in terms of ecosystem functioning and resilience to things like climate change, hurricanes, and so forth. So in 2015, we did a survey and assessment of Delray Beach, Atlantic Dunes Park, and also the municipal beach. And we compiled all the records, as we do when we do this kind of work, that were historically known. And these could include things like personal observations and all kinds of information that are available. And we recorded in our surveys 101 native dune species, but 7 of the historically present ones were missing. We didn't find them in our particular surveys. But when we looked at the data, there were an additional 75 species within native range that were identified as missing and could be restored in the area. And some of these species hadn't been collected in this area since the 1920s. So some things were lost rather early in the development process. We've done a bunch of more work on this since then, and our current list, when we include things like coastal interdunal swales, which are the freshwater wetlands that used to be present on the barrier islands, then the total amount of species that were historically known for this area, which includes basically the county line, Boca Raton, north to Lake Worth, is about 235 native plant species. So where did all this biodiversity go? So this is a great picture shared by Rob Barron. Delray Beach, circa 1970. You can see A1A on the very extreme left-hand side of the slide. And this is kind of a typical picture of the shoreline about that point where we had development too close to the water. We had a lot of hard structures, riprap, jetties, and all sorts of things that were causing coastal erosion. So we either lost native ecosystems by development, such as the buildings on the north on the top of the slide, and then the remainder pretty much eroded away into the ocean. So over the last few decades, we've done some things extremely well. Engineers are good at their work, and there's been a lot of work on coastal renourishment. So a lot of the barrier islands have been renourished. We're able to move sand around. We move sand across inlets and things now. And we also know how to plant dune species like sea oats and a few other species like sea grape and such. Um, and the recovery of sea turtles. I mean, sea turtles were incredibly rare by the 1970s, and and people have done an amazing job of recovering the sea turtle population. There's been some key coastal forests that have been protected. So the maritime forests, the forested part of the ecosystem, were not as common as the Pioneer Zone and the coastal strand that we're going to talk about a little bit later, but very important for biodiversity. And so there's some important areas where protection has occurred, such as Ocean Ridge Hammock Park, the old Boynton Hammock, and Gumbo Limbo Nature Center, for example, in Boca Raton, are key areas where we can see remnant forests and also understand the biodiversity in them. There's been a lot of, in addition to the beach renourishment, we talked about planting sea oats and such, and there's been some great project, Miami Beach, that was done. I participated in that project in the late 1980s, one of the first projects I did coming out of college. And that's been a very stable dune over most of the stretch, not all of it. Some areas are eroding, but by and large, it's been a pretty successful and stable dune system. And Delray Beach has had a lot of work over the decades, including some biodiversity conservation work that's been very important in terms of getting those numbers up toward 100 species of native plants that you won't find everywhere. So the Delray Dune is loaded with rare plants, but like we talked about, it's still missing quite a few things. But it's pretty cool. If you want to see a lot of biodiversity in the dune, then that's a good place to look. However, limited diversity is the norm. So if you really, when we're doing our coastal assessments, if you really drive around or walk or however you want to get across the dunes, then most of what you're going to see is going to be a fairly limited number of species in these along the coastline in the Pioneer Zone. Upland of the Pioneer Zone is the coastal strand. On the left-hand slide, you see this kind of sea of saw palmettos, and this was a dominant ecosystem in southeastern Florida. Although we had more tropical species intermixed with the saw palmettos, this is what you would see. So you would have saw palmettos that would be, not feet or not even yards, but hundreds of yards wide of saw palmettos behind the Pioneer Zone, and the maritime hammocks would mostly have been along the edges of the lakes and the inlets. These areas have been really heavily hit by development, and as well as the freshwater wetlands that I mentioned before, which are almost completely gone. We also see this kind of encroachment. So even where we have native vegetation, in this particular case, the sea grapes have moved from the upland area toward the east, and plants like saw palmettos don't grow very fast, so it's really difficult for them to be able to compete. So we have these kind of monocultures of sea grapes. We've lost the dozens of species that would have been in the coastal strand. And then you can see that the Pioneer Zone sometimes is heavily impacted by humans. Well, it could be foot traffic, it could be beach cleaning machines, but often these areas, it's very difficult for these areas to spread out as they would have historically. So on to the Restoring the Gold Coast. So I just want to mention that, so we did this survey work in 2015, and then starting in 2016, we started working on this, this project at Atlantic Dunes Park in Delray Beach. This is an area that was known for its biodiversity, but it had had a lot of problems with Brazilian pepper and scabola and other exotics, and also spreading canopy of sea grapes. So we started working there, and we had some great support. Did a lot of small projects to kind of move things forward, but it gave us an idea and an ability to kind of use this project as a trial to learn how this might work, and to see how we could work with the system and how the plants reacted and so forth. So in 2018, we had an opportunity to apply a letter of inquiry for Impact 100 Palm Beach County, which we did, titling the Restoring the Gold Coast in Southern Palm Beach County, and we submitted that. And we began to build a network of support. We started publishing in our newsletter and elsewhere, trying to educate people about why diversity of dune systems is important. And then in April 2019, we received the Environment Award from Impact 100 Palm Beach County. And I don't know why that slide does that, but it does. um, so we received the award and we got to work. We built a landing page for the program that you can find on our website that describes restoring the Gold Coast and all about it. And then some of the goals and for the program in Southern Palm Beach County, we wanted to conduct outreach to municipalities and community groups to assess the coastal plant diversity, to conduct hands-on restoration and education events and workshops, increase depleted populations of native plants. So we don't want to just talk about it. We want to actually get out there and do something. And then importantly, we wanted to engage public officials and other influencers about why this is important and to get their support for what it is that we are trying to do. Part of the process is doing assessments of the biodiversity of the dune, finding problems with areas with problems, areas with opportunities, and so forth. And the first we were able to do was in 2019 in June with Ocean Ridge. We've also gotten support from Sea Turtle Adventures in Gulfstream and others. And so we've been able to identify through this process areas of high biodiversity. This is the eastern side of Ocean Ridge, Hammock Park, and also some of the pictures down on the bottom of the slide are from Delray Beach. So we've been able to figure out, okay, where are all the species? Which ones are more common than we might have expected? Which ones are down to one or two populations and so forth? And the idea is, how do we build on the biodiversity that we have and also bring back the species that are completely missing? And we want to be able to identify opportunities. So for instance, in the upper left slide, we have, it's a very expansive, wide dune, but we have sea grapes are beginning to, or continuing to spread laterally. There's also invasive species intermixed in that dune. Can we remove some of those invasive species, for instance, and provide spaces to bring in other species that are missing from that system? In the upper right-hand corner, we have lots of opportunity in the back dunes along A1A, for instance, in Ocean Ridge. We've already talked on the lower left about areas that are predominantly sea oats. What can we do to try and bring back some of the 235 species that belong in the system? And then, kind of key areas like these walkways where the public is going to have an opportunity to see things. Can we do something there that restores biodiversity, but also provides us with some educational opportunities? And just to mention that there are some things that are outside of the scope of this project. This is $100,000 is a lot of money, but in coastal work is not very much. And so we start talking about areas with a lot of erosion, or areas with poor engineering, or things that have been developed too far east and so forth. We're not trying to engage in those areas. We're trying to work with stable dune systems that have a good pioneer zone and opportunities to try and restore some of the biodiversity there and in the coastal strand. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Kara for a couple of minutes. She's going to tell you a little bit about some of the events and community engagement.
Yeah, thanks, George. So, of course, oh yeah, I guess you have to do the slides for me.
Yep, I have to do the slides.
Of course, the plants are a huge focus in this program, but how we're getting those plants out there and the impact that those plants have is just as important. So we're really aiming to build and foster a community through these events. We want people to care about what's going on along the coast and ultimately become advocates for coastal biodiversity and its restoration. We're working with student groups, K through 12, college students, adults, as well as leaders and public officials. And in order to work with all of those different groups, we have to use a variety of methods. So we've been having meetings with key stakeholder groups, giving presentations to interested groups in schools and with adults, and then doing some fun hands-on field trips and public restoration events. So we're gonna give a highlight of what we've done over the last year. So starting with presentations, this is a fun, easy way to engage high number of students. So we've been able to go into Boca Community High, Atlantic Community High. The Milagros Center has an awesome after school program we got to go in and talk to. And then George did a presentation with the Kindness Matters Club at Banyan Creek Elementary School. We just go in and talk about the program. If it's at a high school group, either we try to link it up to a field trip or just encourage the students to come out to our public events on the weekend, which is an opportunity for them to get community service hours if they need them. And a cool outcome from the Banyan Creek Elementary talk are these awesome photos that the elementary schoolers drew. Any background info on this that you want to give us, George?
Well, the idea was, could we get second and third graders to understand the concept of ecological restoration? So we, talked about degradation and what it is that we would like. And so I had my daughter draw this template in the upper left-hand corner that we handed it out to all the students. And so, you see no plants, and it's black and white, and there's trash floating in the ocean, and there's a wilted flower. And so, what do you envision a restored dune system to look like? And so here are just 3 examples of what the students drew. So I thought it was pretty cool that we could get through to kids that young.
That is super cool. But we don't just go in and talk to students. We also hold workshops for adults and give presentations to appropriate groups. So that includes a workshop that we held at Ocean Ridge Town Hall back in November. That was for residents of Ocean Ridge, and we did a small planting with them afterwards. Talked with seniors at the Humana Senior Center. Most weren't able to come out and volunteer, but they really loved hearing about the program, and it's going on in their backyard, and that was a fun one. George was the featured speaker for the February Chamber Luncheon at the Delray Beach Chamber nonprofit. And those are great events. If you are a part of a nonprofit in the area, there's different speakers each month, and we had some fun collaborations that came out of that. Talked to residents of the estates of Silver Lakes, and George has given talks at a few different Florida Native Plant Society meetings. There's been a few of those this year. Like we said, also, we like to get people out in the field and actually get involved in the planting. So a fun way to do that is through school field trips. And I see that we have Dr. Rachel Wellman on the call. So thank you for being on this today. She was our guinea pig in this program. We took her students out back in September to South Inlet Park, which is in South Boca Raton. It's a county park. And we had them plant a ton of maritime hammock species. So we were a little bit back off of the coastal strand area, and they had to dig really hard to get those plants in the ground, and it was a fun day. And aside from just planting, we also walked around, talked about what issues the students could see, as far as biodiversity and conservation goes, and had them brainstorm ways that they could see making a difference on the dunes, and those were fun to read through. We've also taken a decent amount of the earth science students from Atlantic Community High, and I don't know if Chelsea's on the call today, but we appreciated all of her help in organizing those talks and then the field trips out here. We did a field trip back in 2019, and we managed to get one in here in 2020 before everything started shutting down. So we've been taking them out to the main municipal beach in Delray Beach, in between Anchor Park and Sandaway. And we kind of rotate them through stations. We get them planting coastal strand species, hand pulling invasives, picking up trash. And it's worth mentioning that on these field trips, we've had some awesome help running them. Chris Lockhart has come out and been a leader. Rob Barron has sent people out. George, your wife, Emily, has been a huge help. So we're always looking for people like that too, if you have an interest and are available during weekdays to help with those things. And then sometimes we hold, they're like public planting events, but it's for a specific group that wants to get involved and have their group come out. So the first one we did was back in October with the ML61 leadership group, the leadership training program, and they had to do a legacy project coming off of their graduation, if I understand it correctly. And they wanted to do something for the environment that would have a lasting impact. So they raised funds, donated that in to help us buy some plants, and came out on a Saturday afternoon and planted a bunch of things with us in Delray. We also got to work with Sea Turtle Adventures, and I believe we have Heather here from Sea Turtle Adventures, and their eye care nature program at Gulfstream Park back in February, at the end of February. That was a fun morning. We got to have, it was a big group, like 20 people from their eye care program, and then there were 20 high school buddies that came out from St. Vincent, and we planted a bunch of stuff in the dunes there. Also did a beach cleanup that morning as well. Then we hold public events where anyone can come out. The first one was our kickoff event, although this actually got postponed a few weeks because of Hurricane Dorian. But this was our kickoff event in Delray. So we have the nice clippers out there for ribbon cutting to kick off our program. And basically working on building a biodiversity hotspot on the municipal beach. We also had one at Atlantic Dunes Park as part of the International Coastal Cleanup, and that's organized through Keep Palm Beach County Beautiful. We love working with all of their events each year. We get so many volunteers that come out, and you give us great supplies for those events. I think Lourdes may be on the call. We're super appreciative to you for this. We built on biodiversity that we've been working on building up since 2016 at Atlantic Dunes Park. Also did invasive plant removal and picked up trash. And we mentioned we had that workshop at Ocean Ridge Town Hall back in November. We finished that up with a small planting event on the beach there in Ocean Ridge. And in January, we had a sponsored event from Erin Dede Law. I don't know if she managed to make it on the call today, but we're thankful for her for sponsoring several events for us over the years. Back at Atlantic Dunes Park again, just continuing to build on that biodiversity we're trying to get there at the park. We are trying to build on what we're doing at these public beaches by getting into the private beaches. And a great way to do that is to encourage property owners that live on the barrier island in the scope of our work in South Palm Beach County and beyond to purchase a biodiversity plant starter kit that helps build on those populations of plants that we're putting out. So we have a landing page on our website with a lot more information on what kits are available. We also held a webinar specifically on this topic last week. So there's a whole video you could watch on this if you or anyone you know is interested in this. This is an example of one of the kits we're offering. It's the Coastal Strand and Shrubland Starter Plant Kit. And you can see here a description of what plants would come in that kit. One of the kits that we're offering is a butterfly attracting starter kit. So with 5 plants that we've selected for the barrier island, those 5 plants serve as host plants for 10 coastal butterflies. And then there's even more that use them for nectar sources. And we were gearing up for a super fun, busy spring. We had so many things on the calendar to happen this spring, and we won't bore you by reading all of these off. But we have certainly had to make some adjustments from COVID-19 and the implications of that this spring. We're hopeful that most of these will be rescheduled, perhaps on a smaller scale here over the summer and into the fall. But yeah, we just wanted to make sure that, this was mentioned. We had lots on the book for this spring, but hopefully that means there will be lots on the books for this summer and fall as well.
All right, so thanks, Kara. We're going to close with a little conversation about what we've done so far, in addition to the events and our future plans. So I just wanted to show this slide. The gold dots are the places that we've been planting. The blue are the places that we had already had things in process prior to the shutdown, and we hope to continue. You'll notice there's some gaps. So there's gaps, for instance, in Gulfstream and Highland Beach and so forth. So we hope to be able to fill in some of those gaps and also to move a little bit further to the north up toward Lake Worth. I just wanted to spend one moment talking a little bit about this kind of interface between data and implementation. So this is an example where I found this recruit of saw palmetto pretty far out in the dune, and so we're able to use this knowledge to get a better idea of where we can restore different things. So saw palmetto, as we talked about, is kind of a keystone species for coastal strand. It doesn't move very far by itself. So we've been able to document where some of these key plants are and then use that as an indicator for where to do the restoration. So in this particular case, we were infilling saw palmettos in between the dune, which is further to the west, where the saw palmettos, a few remain. This leader that was out on the east side of the dune. Here is a slide of some of the species that we planted in 2019 and early 2020. Some of them had just been planted when we, when we were shut out from doing any watering, but by and large, things look pretty good. The methods that we're using are, allow for the plants to, plants are people too, allow for the plants to survive without much irrigation, and in fact, most things are thriving just fine. I also want to point out that we have a permit from Delray Beach to collect seeds and divisions and things of plants so that we can spread them further. So we're doing that, and we'll have additional species that will be available later this summer and fall. Moving forward, we will hold small scale events as we can, as beaches open up, and as we're allowed to hold small events. And of course, we will practice all the safety precautions that are mandatory. We're also going to put more effort into the biodiversity starter plant kits, getting information out to individuals about how they can make a difference in terms of restoration. We will continue with dune assessments where those have not been completed. Workshops, both online and in person where we can. And these include workshops at all sorts of different levels. They could be for camp directors or instructors. They can be for park staff. And they're also can be geared toward decision makers, so that like we did with some of the towns where we can talk to the town councils or to high level town or city staff about our program and its importance and the need for their support. And then classroom engagement. We don't know how things are gonna roll out, but there's lots of different ways that we can get information out there. So we will continue to deliver that information to students. And with that, just want to point out that we need support. The Impact Grant and the other monies that we've raised help, but we do have a huge hole in our budget due to COVID-19, and so whatever support that people can give to our program would be greatly appreciated. All right, so Kara, I'm going to pass this back to you, and you have, wow, we're doing well for time. We have a little bit more than 15 minutes, so let's see what kind of questions that we have.
Yeah, so at this point, we would encourage you, if you have any questions, it could be things that were discussed during the PowerPoint that you want more info on, whatever may come up, and I'll start relaying those to George. So I see we already have a couple, and we encourage you to keep putting those on the chat box. So the first one is from Patty, and she says, what are plans or hopes for extending south?
Right, so the Restoring the Gold concept originally was to go from within the historic idea of the Gold Coast, which was Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. And then, of course, the regional planning councils tried to chop off Palm Beach County and put it in the Treasure Coast, but we're doing this from the historical perspective. Really, this project has taught us what we need to organize, what we need to know about the plants, how to restore the ecosystems. And so we're really very well situated to move the project in either direction. And we've also had conversations with people in Southwest Florida, for example, where the program could be copied and adjusted for that area. So really all we need are collaborators, and we need financial and logistical support. But in terms of all the other information that we need, we're ready to roll.
Yeah. And Rachel says, we Boca High loved being a part of this project. Thanks so much for including us. Let us know if we can be of any service in the future. What you're doing is so important and it's making a difference. And we loved working with your students. And they did a great job planting those things. I remember that was hard digging, and I followed up with watering there for a couple months, and they really did a great job. So we really appreciated their, help and effort out there. And Heather says, can you email us the link to get to this recording? Absolutely. So hopefully by this evening, I'll have this loaded up on YouTube, and then I can email it out, and we'll also post it like on our Facebook and website and stuff. Marguerite asks, how much square footage do you estimate one plant starter kit would cover?
Yeah, so these are small kits. They're 5 plants, and so you could use them all in 1 square yard, or you could spread them out over 5 square yards. It depends on what you're starting with. And I didn't use it in this webinar, but I have an example of an area that's just maybe 4 or 5 feet by 3 feet between a walkover and some sea grapes and some sapo meadows, and you could easily add 4 or 5 species in a small area like that. The idea is that these, you had these kind of keystone or dominant species like saw palmettos and sea oats, but a huge amount of diversity kind of competing with each other and growing commingled, and that's what the dune will really support. So I encourage people to be creative and try different things out, and I think you'll learn a lot and have a lot of fun.
Ooh, Lourdes asked, have you done or would you consider doing presentations to landscape architects?
Okay, so I've done presentations like at the Florida Association of Native Nurseries Native Plant Show, so that included landscape architects. I would be happy to consider a venue. Sure, we want to get the word out, and landscape architects are a key group that we need to communicate to. So absolutely, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And while we wait to see if any other questions come in, just trying to think, for us with moving forward, if any of you know of groups that would even be interested in online meetings like this moving forward, we had goals and targets of, how many students and adults we were going to reach through the fall, and hopefully we'll be doing those things in person again at some point. But yeah, if you have any leads on that, feel free to shoot me an email. And then same thing with doing small scale planting events. If you know of any, green clubs or, anything, any organizations that might be interested in doing private planting events with us, feel free to let me know.
All right. So you've gone through it looks like you got one more.
Here's one more. Are there any specific guidelines you anticipate to allow you to resume a few volunteer activities? So that's a good question. Actually, Lourdes sent out a wonderful resource that I was telling George about, that I think the Keep America Beautiful put together. And it had really great guidelines for what they saw for like a safe volunteer event. So we will hopefully use those recommendations very closely, honestly. And right now we're just waiting to see when we can get back out there. So I've been putting feeler emails out. We might have to wait till we're in a next phase of reopening in the state, but hopefully soon.
Yep.
I'll put my
all right.
here.
Do you want to?
Any other questions before we start wrapping up?
Would anybody like to use your microphone to say a few words? There's a little hand raising device on this thing, right? If people know how to use that.
Oh yeah, Jenny, go ahead. Or Gina, sorry.
How much would one of these private plantings cost?
Yeah, so the kits that we're putting together are between $60 and $85. The original intent was to raise some money for the program, and that we would have these kits at events. So it was going to be a pretty straightforward thing where in fact, we had our first event at Ocean Ridge was planned for March, where we would launch this program. But that's the pricing. It's about retail price for the native plants. If you would combine them, and one of the things is we're going to try in each kit to provide something that normally you wouldn't be able to find or would be difficult to find at a native plant nursery, and certainly on the regular market. But in terms of how to get them to people, we're working on that aspect right now. But we don't think it's going to be that difficult. We'll figure out how to get the plants to people one way or the other.
And
Thank you.
A private planting event, or did you mean the kits?
Good
I
question.
meant both.
Sorry.
How much is a private planting event? 1 to 5 square yards is not a very large area.
Yeah. So for a private planting event, how it's worked in the past is it's kind of flexible. Being honest though, to like sponsor the event, if that's what you were thinking, that's $1,000 typically for the plants and supplies and everything for a full day's event. Like when we worked with ML61, they did a fundraiser and they raised $250. And we put that towards plants and did a planting thing with them. So if that's something you're interested in, we can definitely talk about it more after this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, are you guys growing your own plants for this? Tiffany asks.
Sort of, but the idea is so we have the ability to plant to collect propagules, and so we're getting those propagules to native plant nurseries. We're doing a little bit of backyard growing, but not much. And also we've shared seeds with schools and other community groups, and we're interested in people helping us to grow some of these things. Some of them are difficult, and so, or little is known about them, so we're going to use the professionals for those. And some of these things are really quite easy to grow, and so we would be really thrilled to collaborate with people if they are able to help us out with that point.
Great. And we look forward to seeing Mary out at the next community volunteer event. Hopefully we'll get some of those scheduled soon. Our goal is to start doing, once we're able to, lots of small events that will keep capped
Right.
at so many people, and hopefully we'll get those going before long.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about these planting events is that in terms of COVID-19 and social distancing is that really people don't, it's really not effective for people to be crowded together, period. So they should be a natural fit. We just need to figure out how to organize things and get permissions from the people who own the beaches that we want to work on. But we're pretty optimistic that we'll be able to figure that part out.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I think we can wrap up. Thank everybody for being here and for the questions, and hope to see some of you at the events. Shoot us an email if you have other questions, and really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.